Well, Charlotta, as I was noting, it's innovation's not just, and Niclas was mentioning this too, is not just about identifying and testing shiny new things. It's also about spreading ideas and adapting them to local conditions. And faith-based organizations have that way of thinking in their DNA, I would say. You might say they have thousands of years of practice in spreading ideas and values. So perhaps that works to their advantage in adopting and spreading development cooperation ideas. And certainly Niclas had an interesting example in that regard. Faith-based organizations also have, and I don't need to tell this group this, this, a very special legitimacy in many of the contexts where they work, which can also be a big advantage when it comes to spreading these ideas. SMC also has its history in that regard. You applied innovative methods some years ago, gender learning reviews, which then later generated many other ideas. So it's just one example of how one good innovation can then create a cascade of other good innovations once you start the process flowing. But it does take time and patience. I mean, if you want to do something new, you have to stick with it for a while. Again, faith-based organizations are rather used to sticking with things for a long while. They're in it for the long haul usually. But all that being said, there's no denying that there's strong power in tradition that can hinder innovation. I have to learn myself to challenge what I was talking about, the inner voice of my grandfather, the "if it ain't broke, don't fix it" voice. Much as I loved him so much, but we have to challenge our habitual ways of doing things in ourselves. And acknowledge that, well, yes, I'm a really good runner, but I've got to try something new or you won't get there. Time's short. But I do think that they do have special advantages, for the most part, faith-based organizations.
Thank you, Alan. That's encouraging to hear. And before I ask Mercy the next question, just again encourage everyone to ask questions in the chat if you have something that you would like to ask to any one of the three panelists. Mercy, so it was very interesting what you described about the I Choose Life, and I know you also have other examples from your work, how you have worked innovatively and with networking, but how do you think the work that you do on the ground, how does it fit with what Alan presented when it comes to system innovation and how you can scale up things and work transformatively?
I'm so glad that Alan spoke first. I think he set a very good foundation in what we see on the ground. I gave the example with I Choose Life in how they work with different players in society. They work with government, they work with private sector, academia, civil society. I'll pick an example of livelihoods enhancement. We might have CSOs that go in and provide training, entrepreneurship training, life skills training, and discuss issues on gender and so on. But once those people who have been trained produce something to sell, they need to sell it somewhere. If we don't have access to markets, if we don't have access to places where the youth can get employed and so on within private sector, then it becomes very difficult. If government doesn't set up infrastructure and policies and influenced by reality from the communities where the different CSOs work, then we will be dealing with symptomatic issues and not really digging into what the root causes of issues are. So innovation is very important in bringing different people together, not just for ideas, but also then to see what competency, what capacity does this player have, and what can it do to change and improve things in the space. Without innovation in terms of how to bring that kind of collaboration, without innovation to provide such platforms, then it just remains an idea of, it would be good if we had this in place, but then there's no way to link that idea, that creativity to actually things that can actually then take root, be action, and hopefully start cascading into change and sustainable change at that. Yeah.
Thanks. A question for Niclas. Looking at Swedish actors in Swedish society, how do you see that faith-based actors could collaborate with other types of actors, such as government, private sector, academia, in the best way to make headway in the implementation of the 2030 agenda?
Yeah, we already do it, but I think we need to. We don't make use of the great potential there is, and I mean the budget to reach the goals, it's not enough, and it might be difficult to run twice as fast as we do. I think we all run quite fast already, but maybe. I didn't have time to share about it, but this blind spot when it comes to religion and the religious, I mean, the part religion and faith plays in development processes, that blind spot might risk that we will not see how we may connect the dots in the best way. So I think we really need to learn together from all different fields, from business, from academia, from government, and from civil society and faith-based actors. And I think we need to be quite bold and open-minded and think out of the box. I mean, one question to ask ourselves is, what is spiritual and what is social when we talk about development? I'm sure you all are very well aware of the World Health Organization's definition of well-being. And they have included many aspects that are considered quite spiritual. I mean, feeling hope, having spiritual strength, seeing faith as a resource, feeling that there is purpose, there is a meaning with things. So those kind of aspects, if you want to develop a community, feeling harmony, inner peace. So sometimes we have divided what is spiritual and what is not spiritual, because this is the way we view things. But I think we need to challenge ourselves and find the connections in a better way and connect the dots, as I said. And if I would say, mention two things that we need to do better as faith-based actors, I think we haven't been good enough in networking. So I think we need to step up. I think we need to be more open and open to networks. But I also think we need to be better working on the structural level. I sat in a meeting with a spiritual leader in Africa, and he told me, he was training pastors, and he said, we don't have to train pastors that they have to care for the community. They will do it. It's in their DNA. But we have to tell them how development theory and good theology goes together, because otherwise we will have individuals, but it will not change the community. So I think bringing theology and development theory together in a better way, that is something we really need to work on as FBOs, and analyze when we hinder development, when we are a problem. So there are a lot of things to do, but I think we need to learn together on this, and we really need to try to understand it better.
Thank you, Niclas. And again, we come back to this need to have religious literacy, to be bilingual when you work with development as a faith-based actor, and also for all kinds of actors, I would say, to understand the role of religion in development. Thanks. I do have a sidekick here today, and that is Annika, who was singing to us before together with Miriam. And she is picking up on what is being posted in the chat. So Annika, do we have any questions from the chat?
Yes, good morning. I'd like to ask a question from Rafael in Congo to Alan. Which experiences and examples can you give of overcoming the resistance which exists to innovation?
You're muted.
Alan, we can't hear you.
That someone muted me, so and I didn't notice that. I need to be muted more often, probably. Thanks. I'll try to think if I can come up with a concrete example on short notice. I could actually start big and even just notice that the introduction of the Sustainable Development Goals was not met universally with a lot of acceptance. There was resistance even to the idea of having sustainable development goals. For 3 years, the world fought about whether to have sustainable development goals in a very public setting. So the short answer to a question like that, which, because that story ended happily with a global adoption of that process, was a lot of dialogue, a lot of listening, a lot of engagement. And I think we heard from both the other speakers, not least of which the very concrete example that Mercy was talking about, engagement and involvement is what helps us overcome resistance. And by the way, resistance isn't always bad. Resistance is usually giving us information about something that perhaps we weren't aware of, something problematic or some more complicated sort of factor we have to deal with. So lots of listening and dialogue is the best strategy for overcoming resistance. And sometimes you have to listen to the resistance and try something else.
Thanks, Alan. So dialogue, again, is a key to development. Annika, do we have any more questions?
From Andrea Vogt. So is a mix and interaction of civil society and private sector, which previously was always seen as very separate and lines one shouldn't cross in programs, is this mix now welcome under innovation?
Very interesting question. May I start maybe with Mercy with this question, a bit about also maybe I think traditionally my impression is that civil society has been quite resistant and quite hesitant about collaborating with private sector, and is that going away?
I'd say it will always be a spectrum, depending on the issue that is being advocated for, all the type of innovation. Of course, different players have different agendas and different priority areas. And as Alan was mentioning, it's about engagement and dialogue and looking at, don't know if it's win-win, but win-win situations where private sector can see value in innovation. CSOs can see, the importance of collaborating. So my answer to that would be, I think it's getting better. I think private sector is seeing value in being social ventures and being socially aware. And I think CSOs are also seeing value in integrating and bringing on private sector on board so that their ideas and their agendas and their values find a place where they intersect. So I think it's improving, it's growing, but I think it's also a component of dialogue, engagement, and finding places of an intersection or collaboration.
Yeah, thank you. And I must say, it's not only maybe civil society that has been skeptical before, or to some extent maybe still is. I remember I've been working at Sida for 25 years before coming to SMC, and I know that large parts of Sida have for a long time been skeptical towards collaborating with civil society, with private sector. And I myself was that also, if I go back 15 years in time. So I think it's a matter of development and actually seeing the possibilities. Niclas, you would like to add something to this?
Yeah, maybe just one other perspective. I think for the civil society, we need each other. We need to cooperate both with the private sector, with the government. We all need each other. At the same time, the civil society also have the watchdog role and being able to criticize and make sure that both private sector and government would behave according to the values that we stand for. So I think you need both sides of it. You need cooperation, but we have separate roles. And that's also important to remember, probably.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And turning to Alan, of course, being the head of the department, director of the department, where you actually try to mix all these groups together, you must have a very clear opinion on this.
Oh, I don't know about a clear opinion, but certainly a lot of experience and I think, Mercy, you've already said this, there's a spectrum. I said it also in the little interview we did in the magazine. I think that it's wonderful that we have an ecosystem of civil society organizations who have different roles, because there's an ecosystem of private sector actors who are more or less friendly to the issues that we're discussing here around sustainable development, for example. So there's no sort of mandate that now civil society should work with the private sector. It's more that there is, as you were saying, Charlotta, an evolution that's happening, and people are discovering who can they work with in a relationship of trust that works. So it's entirely up to the civil society actors to decide which role they are playing in that context and what's the best approach. I'll say just one anecdote though from my time prior to working in Sida, because I worked advising both companies and large civil society organizations many times. I remember being at a planning meeting with a very large, well-known company. And in the middle of the planning meeting, the news came in that civil society activists were protesting outside one of their factories. And the response was, among this team of sustainability people inside this company, "Oh, that's great. For now, we'll have much more openness from the other decision makers in the company about these ideas we're trying to promote for more sustainable solutions." So we do need to keep these roles, all of these roles in mind, that they all and celebrate that diversity. Even as I think there is more openness and possibility now for finding those places of collaboration where we can actually be truly synergistic in advancing these larger scale transformative processes.
Thanks. Annika, do we have any more questions?
Sure. Solod, from YMCA YWCA is asking, innovation is a bit of a buzzword with many donors willing to push and encourage their partners to do innovative practices. But can you really create or force innovation?
I think that's a question directed to Alan.
Oh, but I'm sure that my colleagues Niclas and Mercy have much to say about it. I'll very briefly say you can create it, but you can't force it. I think that's the short answer. You can create the conditions for innovation. Not just, there are many expressions about this involving horses. I'm sure some of you know these expressions. Creating the conditions for people to drink water, but they have to choose themselves. So I would never try to force it, I guess would be my advice. But by listening, working, adapting, co-creating, then it can work. But what do Mercy and Niclas think? That's what I'm curious about.
Let me say just two quick things to address that question. One is a quote, as I was thinking about the session today, a quote that kept coming up is, if you don't grow, you end up stagnating and eventually dying. So if we don't adapt, if we don't innovate, we might be at a standstill, but eventually die. The second thing I'll say is the example of blackberries. Blackberries at some point, maybe 10 years ago, a decade ago or so, were the info. Like if you didn't have a BlackBerry, if you were not BBMing and all those things, you were behind. People were looking at you as if, you're not connected with what the world is doing. But now blackberries are not in the market anymore. And probably, and I'm not in that space, but is it a question of innovating? So it cannot be forced, but it is important to communicate why it is important to keep rethinking and renewing how we think, how we do things, just so that we can continue growing and also just having impact in the spaces that we want to have impact in.
Yeah, maybe just one more aspect of it. I think we all need to create a culture that would help innovation. I mean, within our organizations and within the corporation. If it's okay to take risks, if it's okay to make mistakes, then we will make it possible for people to be innovative. But if people are afraid of making mistakes, we will just continue the way we have done things before. So we have to be a bit bolder than before, probably.
Yeah, I think that is very correct. We need to be able to make mistakes. We need to learn from the mistakes, and we have to have some kind of an iterative approach when we work with innovation. so that we can go forward. And probably the direction isn't clear from the start always. I think maybe we have time for one more question. Annika?
Absolutely. In the private sector, this comes from Cam Kolash at LM International. In the private sector, we normally refer to that customers know best. LM works closely with a community approach, and we give them a platform, an international platform to raise and amplify their voices. How can we make this move more of a mainstream thinking within the CSO sphere?
Anyone who would like to pick on that one?
I can try make a quick attempt, so I can give Niclas and Mercy more time to think. I think that's actually a good example of what we were talking about. It's already, fortunately some years beyond this, but it wasn't so very long ago in our memory of development work that listening to what people actually want, what we call ownership, what they creating that idea of defining your own needs for development and then getting the support from supporting organizations, was a new idea. It was in fact an innovation in its time. That's something probably also important to remember, that most of the things that we now call common practice were at some point innovations, and then they establish themselves, they become traditions. So the now growing tradition of ownership, listening to what people really need, is still, however, innovative in some contexts. Some organizations are still learning that skill. So there's also an interesting dividing line. When do things stop being innovation and start becoming just learning and the ordinary process of change? As you notice, I don't really care too much about those kinds of distinctions. I just like to encourage the general process. So adopting that listening approach, that organizational centered, people centered approach in our work is critical to fostering innovation, and is itself sometimes still innovative.
Thanks. Niclas, Mercy, would you like to add anything on this question?
No. I think Alan covered it quite well.
Yeah,
Great.
Maybe just, I mean, the listening is not always easy, and the dialogue. So I think it takes, it is a challenging thing to really listen to each other and try to understand each other's perspectives. And that will be very much needed if we are to be successful in innovation, to really try to listen to each other, understanding each other's perspectives, and enter the dialogue, really not with the will to debate things, but to have a dialogue. So that is maybe very challenging for all of us.
Thanks. And before we finish, and I would like you to finish, all three of you, to take just 1 minute saying something about your takeaway from this session. But I have a question for Alan. Hearing the discussion here today, what you said yourself, what we have been talking about, do you think that there is a possibility that actors within Swedish development cooperation have underestimated the importance and possibilities of religion and religious actors in development cooperation, that we're kind of not seeing enough possibilities? It's a bit of a leading question, but I would like to hear your take on it.
Thanks, Charlotta. Well, of course, I think we should all be humble in face of the great challenge of trying to be good actors for development and development cooperation. And I think there are many aspects of the work with faith-based actors and just general religious literacy that we who work on the public sector agency side of the equation always need to learn more about. I know from my own experience that in many of the situations where people were working, without a good understanding of the dynamics of the faith-based organizations, there was no help for any success in a particular initiative. So have we underestimated their power? Well, I certainly want to look at that study Niclas quoted. That was interesting from a multiplier perspective. But I think it's more important that perhaps we always need to increase our appreciation for each other by learning more about each other and by the examples that we're all trying in different spheres, cross-pollinating as much as possible, which has also been one of the themes of this wonderful session, Charlotta, bringing new groups together to learn more about each other, because it sounds like a cliche, but it's actually incredibly powerful strategy for generating new and innovative approaches.
Great. Thanks, Alan. So then I will give you 1 minute each to just say something about your takeaways, and we will start with Niclas.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been very good to be together with you in this session. You learn a lot every time you meet with people and discuss these kind of things. As you started off saying, Alan, we live in really challenging times, and we really need each other, and we need to learn together how to be more we need more innovation in everything we do, and we probably cannot run faster, so we really need to invent new ways of moving together. So I would be very happy to continue this dialogue with you and discuss how this could be done. And one of my takeaways is though that we really need to discuss the risk-taking more. Because that would be fundamental, I think, to be able to take risks and maybe sharing the risks, since that will be very much needed if we are to try new things, new ways of working. It will not be a paved road where we can travel safely, but it will be bumpy, probably. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Niclas. And Mercy, 1 minute.
For sure, I've also learned a lot. I was, taking notes as I was also speaking and listening. It's been a really good session. I think one of the things that has stood out is just remembering that innovation is not always creating something new, but it's probably, adding value along the way to the processes and so on. It doesn't have to be completely new for it to be considered innovation. And that requires a lot of learning, a lot of dialogue, a word that has come up a lot, collaboration, and even part of the topic or the theme of this session, networking for us to be able to innovate. And also not to fear resistance for innovation. It will open up my eyes, our eyes, to probably even improving the innovation even more, and maybe even do away with that innovation because some things have come out of it. So resistance is not always a negative thing. That's a way of learning and growing along the way. So thank you, Niclas. Thank you, Alan, for those very insightful thoughts you've shared along the way. And for everybody who has been part of this discussion and just sharing the questions. It's been really good.
Thank you, Mercy. And lastly, Alan, do you have a specific takeaway from the session?
Well, my major takeaway is just gratitude and energy. It's always such a pleasure and delight to interact, even in these virtual environments, which we've all gotten used to, with people who are doing the work and struggling to make it real. Of course, I noted and also noted in the chat questions around risk-taking, risk-sharing. I mean, these are very important and hot topics in this space, because we all have to, in all of our different realms we're working, do that balancing act between what is the responsible thing to do and what is the necessary thing to do, and find ways to be innovative and take risks in ways that somehow still can be responsible. And I think even especially responsible to the people we're trying to support. We're not here to experiment on people with poverty and oppression. We're here to find solutions and new ways forward. ways to not have to run so hard, as Niclas was into there, but find ways to move together on new vehicles faster, safely. So risk is always part of it, and risk is also something that we have to keep dialoguing about in our partnerships with each other. But mostly, again, I just want to say a huge thank you, Charlotta and Mercy and Niclas, for this dialogue, and to SMC for the fantastic work that the entire family of organizations does. It's truly inspiring in the deepest sense of that word. So that's what I take with me.
Thank you so much, Alan, and thank you for those encouraging words to us as a network. And thank you to all three of you for this session. I think it's been most inspiring, and I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone else has as well. So thank you to all of you. Warm thank you to all three of you.